I'm on. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your presentation, Jessica. Very touching. First of all, I'm a nightmare to all organizers because I never talk what I'm told to talk about, but I will partly talk about what I'm told to talk about, but not only. First of all, I have 4 points, just before I forget it. That is, talking about we should take care of the focus. I will come back to the Bible later on. We should be aware of floating borders between fake news and junk news. We should be aware of new threats. And finally, I do have some discussion about possible solutions regarding the social media. First of all, to the Bible. Matthew, I think it is in English, 6:6, said, "Search and you shall find." But he never told us where to look. We often look towards Russia when we are talking about fake news. Like we are looking towards the Islamic world when we are talking about terror, only to be surprised that sometimes terror comes from inside our own societies, Breivik, New Zealand, for example, New Zealand. And the same goes with fake news. We should be very careful not to relate fake news only to Russia. I'm saying this because we are heading towards 2 elections in Denmark, a double election possibly, a national election and also the European parliamentary election. Denmark would be a natural goal for Russian interference. We are a pain in the butt, so to speak, when we talk about Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline in the Baltic Sea. It's really controversial, and Denmark is not making it easier to make this pipeline. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, our National Intelligence Agency came out with a report claiming that they did not foresee that Russia would interfere in the Danish election. They noted that they would have the capacity to do so. They also noted that they could have a certain interest in doing so, but they also noted that the risk of losing credibility, reputation, would be very big as well. So the conclusion was that they do not think that the biggest risk against the Danish election will come from Russian fake news. It could come, and you should be aware, but as we see it by now, it is not a big danger in Denmark. They also concluded that when it came to the European parliamentary election, there would be much more of a risk, because many of the countries might be more important to Russia. So, of course, there's a risk. I'm not saying that, but I'm only saying that it's not the only risk, and we should be very aware not to be blind and only see one part of the risk. I'll go back to last year's election in Bavaria. Bavaria is a German state, very important to Russia, the most important according to Putin. They did not see a very big interference from Russia when it came to the Bavarian election. What they saw was actually a much more troubling interference from the far right. Some of you might have been to the Munich Security Conference, and they made a report. One of the conclusions were, foreign states did not appear to be the most intent on interfering in the Bavarian context, with non-state networks of international far-right activists far more active in using all the tools at their disposal online to manipulate voters, media, and to undermine trust in the election in itself. In Germany, far-right online networks and troll armies are particularly sophisticated and have a track record of election interfering campaigns. And they are pointing to trolling armies like Conquista Germanica and Infokrieg. It's just very important that we focus not only on Russia, that is my point here, but keep focusing broadly. We just had, just to be sure, it's not said that Russia did not have a biased coverage of the German election in Bavaria. One of the other conclusions were, while Sputnik Deutschland provided proportionally more coverage for the AfD party than any other party in the run-up to the Bavarian election, the nature of the coverage was biased and occasionally sensationalist, but the outlet did not promote disinformation. So it was more about the focus coming out from Sputnik Deutschland than it was actually the content. The basic fake news came from far right. We just had an election this weekend in Spain. They also discussed fake news. What came out was actually that the far right, according to an organization called Avaz, was actually very, very active. They've been more active than the Russians right now. One of the examples came from Unidad Nacional Española, who claimed that if you had a burglar in your house, don't touch that burglar, because you could end up in prison longer than the burglar. That is misinformation, it's nonsense, but of course it's used in the context of election because you want to raise a debate about how we treat crimes. Then second, junk news. We are discussing a lot, and now I come to my topic. We are discussing a lot about junk news in Denmark. I don't know where the line goes between fake news and junk news exactly. They are kind of blurred. What you can say about junk news is they look like classical news, but they are often very bad researched, based partly on truths, partly of non-truths, but it looks like it is normal media. They're called something like 24 News, the short paper, then called Avis for Danish speakers, and Newspeak. And my newspaper went through a lot of questions in the parliament. It's so that in the Danish parliament, politician, the member of parliament can ask questions to the minister. What we found out that at least 69 written questions for the ministers had since 2015 was based on articles in this media called or deemed junk news by junk news media by experts. One of the examples was a politician very known in Denmark. She was asking the Minister of Justice what he would do with two Arab kids who was throwing stones towards against the cars on the street. And the minister, the police was investigating, and it ended up there had never been such two Arab kids. It was junk news. But the minister had to offer, had to spend a lot of time in his system to answer that question. Then the politician, she was asked, what did you do to sort out yourself in this news you are raising questions on? And she said, well, I cannot spend my time to see if a journalist is good enough or not, then I would be busy. And then she was also claiming that our national news TV also made mistakes, so it could be the same. That is my second point. It's not only about media and non-media being irresponsible. It's also about politicians taking on themselves what they are spreading, what they are basing their debate on. Coming to two elections, you can find plenty of opportunities for politicians to find news in media they like, but who are junk news media. So be aware of the junk news media. During the recent Swedish election, there was a fear of Russian interference. That was investigated by Oxford Internet Institute in September 2018, while the election was ongoing. They were analyzing tweets posted between the 8th and 17th of August, and the study showed that 8 of the top 10 junk news sources were Swedish, and that Russian sources comprised less than 1% of the total number of viewers shared in the data sample. Meaning that the disinformation came more from inside Sweden, much more from inside Sweden than from outside. Again, beware of the focus. Then a warning, third point, that is the deep fake. I don't know how many of you are aware of what can be done technologically nowadays, but you can actually make people looking like they're saying something they're not saying. Just in May, Donald Trump was appearing on a Belgian channel saying, "As you know, I had the balls to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement," he said, and looked into the camera and say, "And so should you." Trump said that to the Belgian electors. But he never said it. It just appeared so. It looked like he did so. Because for technological reasons now, you can actually make people saying something they never said. That is scary. We saw it with Obama. We have seen it with so many other people. But could you think of a situation where Trump apparently is telling, "I am now invoking a nuclear attack on North Korea," and they see that in North Korea, and in cyber days you react like this, and they counterattack. But it was all rubbish. That is really, really scary. And that is something we should be aware of. Not only media, also politicians. What can we do about it? And now I come back to another thing I should talk about, that is the social media. How much responsibility should we put on them? We know that in Germany they have made this impossible to pronounce, Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz. For people like me, it's for short, NetzDG. And it means that if social media are constantly and systematically spreading misinformation, they can be deemed very big fines. You will correct me later on. The debate has been that the tech companies could be so afraid of spreading misinformation and to avoid fines that they would actually stop news spreading before, just to be sure, spreading news faster than they should do. They would put the bar too low. We have also seen other governments reacting recently, Australia one of them. In Denmark we also had the debate, how much should the responsibility be for the social media? In the Danish Emergency Management Agency, Beredskabsstyrelsen, they made a small pamphlet, say, think before you share, but that might not be enough to counteract misinformation. What I can be a bit bothered about is how easily we seem to debate a new kind of censorship without debating what we can also lose. It's really a difficult balance we have to walk. Back in 1773, just to take a point where I started my career, we had a system in Denmark where the police master, we call him the master of police, he could actually forbid books before they were ever released. That is the case we are coming back to on Facebook and Google nowadays. That they can actually take away posts before you know of it, without having any reason for it, without you have any way of asking, appealing the decision. It's also dangerous, although I understand why you also have to confront the fake news spreading. So we would have to walk a very difficult balance. I think what is the debate in Denmark is actually that tech giants will be taken more responsible for what they are spreading. But if I would support a solution where they should also be responsible for what to be seen or not, a privately owned, profit-oriented company, I would be aware of that. I would never recommend that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikael. Before we go to Kaspers and give word to him, I wanted to just clarify. You mentioned this case, this example with the deep fake in Belgium and President Trump. Do you have any experience in Denmark, something similar?
No, I'm not aware of anything with a deep fake. I'm aware with some misinformation about Denmark, about a Russian disinformation thing, story saying that we had a brothel for animals in Copenhagen, and you could have sex with animals as long as you did not misbehave or something like that. I mean, it was a sick joke. But that is the kind of examples we have been discussing recently. I'm not saying that would be the only example, of course not. But the deep fakes, I haven't seen it, but I really fear it, I must say. I think that's going to be the new black, as we say in Denmark. That is deep fakes.
Okay.